This session will be held in English. Not a day goes by without reading in the media about cyber attacks and the effect they have on companies, organizations, and authorities. Behind the scenes, PwC's global threat intelligence teams, they work around the clock to help our customers to prevent, detect, and actively counter cyber terrorists. Now you will learn more about how our team works with these questions, and we will give our first speaker of the day, we give him a big round of applause. His name is Matt Carey.
Hej allihopa och god morgon. Och förlåt för att jag ska prata engelska idag för att min svenska är inte så flytande. Men jag känner mig en liten liksom Madonna när jag har en mick på mig sådär. Okay. My name is Matt Carey. I'm the head of the cyber threat intelligence area here in PwC Sweden. But I'm also the Europe, Middle East and Africa lead for cyber threat intelligence for PwC. We have a global team which reaches out across APAC, EMEA, the US and the UK and Ireland. And we have a small team here which draws from that larger team to develop a lot of threat intelligence on the threat actors that we care about. So what is threat intelligence? There's a lot of different and complicated definitions out there, but for those of you who are wondering, it's basically all the understanding of what threat actors, what hackers are out there doing, the sort of networks that they develop, the sort of techniques and tactics they developed to hack computers and hack networks. That's it in a nutshell. And we as a team are really a bunch of researchers who try and look at what the threat actors are doing, understand exactly how they're doing what they're doing in terms of how they hack targets, and then we provide that information back to our customers in order for them to be able to understand and detect that activity if they see it against their networks, but to also understand what the strategy is that the hackers are using, why they're trying to hack particular sectors, and where they're going next, so that we know what the next steps are going to be in terms of how they're going to go after us in the future. The sorts of attackers that we look at broadly are broken into 4 separate categories. So there are those hackers out there that want to spy on you, and often they're nation states and they're military defense sort of departments who are looking at satisfying global threat intelligence requirements that the countries have for strategic understanding of what's going on around them so that they can further their interests. We also have obviously criminals out there who are doing hacking in order to get money. And let me tell you that doing hacking for criminal purposes is a much safer pursuit than doing sort of like selling firearms or selling drugs or anything like that. So you see a lot of the criminal fraternity and particularly organized crime going more into hacking as a much safer way of making money and being able to scale that on a very large global level. And whereas in the past we saw these hackers just working from home in very small pockets going after individual organizations, now we very much see criminals operating in office environments with proper like healthcare plans and pension plans and doing it 24/7. So around the globe, 24/7 type targeting of larger companies where they go after individual organizations and then whole sectors in order to try and get the maximum amount of profit that they can, usually from ransomware type operations, but we also see business email compromise very commonly out there. So there's a lot of criminal activity, and that's really the majority of hacking that we actually see. And then we have the hacktivists out there, so people are hacking for a political cause or any kind of cause, and you might also think about a subset of that being terrorists who might use hacking for their purposes. Most of that hacking that we see really is against websites, and website defacement is to cause embarrassment or reputational damage to the target. It's not to destroy or really cause them any kind of financial harm. However, of course, that can come. And then, of course, we do see sabotage where we see big nation-state actors, often with a very political purpose behind them, trying to wipe data, trying to destroy data, and trying to disrupt services in order to make a political point, or even in pursuit of a military objective. So that's very common. In the team, we track around about says up there 400 threat actors, so quite a lot of threat actors out there doing this whole scope of hacking that we worry about. And that's the sort of reporting that we produce and we push out to our customers and clients to help you understand what that whole spectrum of hackers across all those different sectors are up to. So why do you actually need any of this cyber threat intelligence in the first place? That's what a lot of people ask me as a first question. So what we do see against companies, and certainly here in Sweden and elsewhere, is a lot of theft of sensitive information. Now, that could be personally identifiable information about your employees, which they will hold to ransom, or they will threaten to release otherwise, or they might use that information in particular in order to target them or target their families or target their interlocutors in their social media. There's a whole range of different things that you can use that for, and then to pursue those other objectives of intellectual property theft, financial gain. There's a range of different things. Intellectual property theft. So if your company has an extremely good newly developed product that you're about to put on the market, you spent 10 to 12 years researching it, and it's ready to go out there, hacking is a really easy way of getting into your data, stealing all that new research that you've done into your product, and then producing it yourself in another part of the world in order then to sell it maybe more cheaply, maybe on a mass scale, maybe before you've even had a time to get your product trademarked and pushed out into the market. So we see that very commonly with a lot of big companies that are involved with defense portfolios, automotive, manufacturing. This type of intellectual property theft happens a lot. And it happens silently, so it's not the thing that pops up in an incident every 5 seconds if you can't detect it. It's often something where the hackers have managed to get in, they've got legitimate access to your network, they've found their way through the network into that sensitive information you've got, and then they lift it out and they silently take it away, and then they use it, and the next thing you know that you've been hacked is something that you've created, freshly researched, developed, has suddenly appeared somewhere else in the world, looks exactly the same, works exactly the same. However, somebody else has got it. How did they get it? Often it's through hacking of this description, and there's a lot of nation states out there that are doing that. Theft of money we've spoken about. It could be a ransomware attack where the ransomware actor has got in, they've managed to get hold of your most sensitive information in terms of how much it costs you to produce what you do, how much you make on a daily basis, and then they will charge a ransom that will basically ensure that you are going to pay whatever ransom they're going to ask for, because you will go out of business if you don't do that quickly. So that's like a really popular form of criminal activity that we see at the moment. Disruption to services. Well, that's the other side of ransomware. If they can lock up your services so that you can't actually access your client databases, you can't get in touch with your supply chain, you can't deliver the services that you normally deliver, then that is a way of stopping your business and forcing you to pay a ransom. Or it could be used for destructive or malicious purposes. You might have an insider in your business who has moved somewhere else and wants to cause you harm because they don't like the way they've been treated. That's another way of doing that. Destruction of data or servers, we don't see that as often, but we see this on a very large scale. So you would have noticed that Albania last year had a terrible problem with some Iranian nexus actors who came in, locked up a lot of their government with ransomware, and then tried to destroy all their data. You saw it at the start of the war with the Ukraine, where they went attacking Ukraine's second biggest bank, and then trying to wipe all of those services and cause mass financial harm there. So we see this kind of destructive sabotage type attack increasingly as a tool of nation state choice in order to cause harm that's not physical harm, but usually it's not just done by itself, it's usually done as an adjunct to other military type activity, although we do see, for example, some actors who are receiving sanctions, and when they get sanctioned by a country, they reply with a cyber attack that might wipe data or cause them some kind of destructive harm. So we see that too. And then, of course, we see ideas of reputational damage. So this might be where someone doesn't like a politician and they want to like deface their website and cause some embarrassment. We see that kind of thing. Or we might see, like, in a worst case, in a case of industrial espionage, where a company might, otherwise be doing quite well, and then you'll end up with somebody trying to release or leak information that might cause them embarrassment, deface their website, cause them not to function so that the competitor can do better. We do see that as well. So in the past year, we put out a report every year called the Year in Retrospect, which is a bit of a roundup of all the things that we're seeing right across the spectrum of hacking. And when we look here, we see that, okay, there's a much closer tension between when the hackers actually do the hack and defenders being able to mitigate or respond very quickly to what's being done by the hacker to defend against it. I think, particularly in the Russia-Ukraine war, we had a really interesting dynamic where there's a lot of Western threat intelligence and other organizations out there looking at the hacking that's happening, helping the defenders stop it, and then the actors, knowing that they're being watched by threat intelligence organizations, are rapidly adapting and then responding with new techniques while they're being watched in order to continue their objectives. We see with cloud, and most organizations are moving to cloud as a safer and more secure way of operating and using their data and storing their data and having a lot of the security burden placed on the cloud provider to look after their most sensitive information for them and their services. Threat actors know this, so they're looking at ways of how do I compromise the cloud? Well, I go and I try and get the credentials or the otherwise the access that is available to somebody who's got legitimate access to the cloud. I steal that, and then I can get into the cloud after that, and then I can move around, do what I want, do my hacking operations after that. So identity is suddenly becoming the battleground where we've got cloud actors, and that's a big thing. Geopolitics, I've already mentioned the war in Ukraine. I've already mentioned what happened in Albania. We see in North Korea, they're going after cryptocurrency providers, etc. So geopolitics does influence what happens on a big scale with hacking out there. And we also see, I mentioned ransomware as being the big kind of plague-like threat that's spreading throughout the criminal world, and actually is probably the biggest threat to all of you here in this room who have companies. Ransomware is the most likely thing that you're going to get hit by. The problem with ransomware is people go, well, that's just criminal malware, or that's just a criminal attack. Yes, but actually most of the malware that's developed, the malicious software that's developed by criminals, is just as complex and just as functional as malware developed by state-sponsored actors. So it is just as big a threat, and it is just as difficult to defend against. So staying ahead of the criminal actors, who always have a very specific kind of stake in staying ahead of the development cycle themselves, to push out the next big thing, the next malware that's going to compromise you, is a really, really difficult task. And it's one of the things that we, as a threat intelligence organization, put a lot of effort into in order to make sure that you are getting the latest information to help you defend against whatever the latest attacks are. So what does it actually give you, this cyber threat intelligence that we're providing? Well, it tells you a little bit about who's going after you, and if you're in a particular sector, and what they want. It tells you quite a lot about how they're going to hack you and what techniques they're going to use to do that. It tells you quite a lot about what your vulnerabilities are. So we actually produce reports that are specifically on, okay, Microsoft has released this vulnerability. What does it actually mean to me? What could an attacker use that for to attack me? Because most attackers are like thieves standing outside of your house, trying to work out how they get into your house to get your most sensitive and expensive things that they can steal and then use for themselves. So they're looking at your doors, they're looking at the windows, they're looking at what's open, what's closed, how hard is it to get past that reinforced bar that you've got across your window, etc., to get into the house. They're very much like that. And vulnerabilities, which are usually weaknesses in software or weaknesses in hardware, are the ways that they get into your house to then steal all your stuff. And like I said, a lot of them are actually stealing the keys off you when you're not looking to get in through the door, and then roaming around your house looking for stuff as well. So if you don't have cyber threat intelligence to use on the inside of your network to detect what looks like legitimate users roaming around, but doing unusual things, accessing applications they shouldn't be, getting into data they shouldn't be. You need a way to detect that, as well as you need a way to detect them trying to come in and attack you from the outside. And then you end up, obviously, in this situation where you want to understand what sort of information the hacker is interested in. So what are the crown jewels that you need to protect in order to keep yourself safe and your services safe and your economic sort of like dependent main sort of things, crown jewels safe. And then you also want to be able to understand where your security is weak and whether there's anyone on the inside of your organization that could be hacking you as well, or maliciously using their legitimate access to do malicious things against you. So how you actually use intelligence is going to be dependent on how mature you are as an organization. Every organization is different, so the degree to which you might have a SOC or you might not have a SOC in order to process your threat intelligence. You might only have 1 or 2 people who are actually doing threat intelligence in your organization who need to quickly identify what happens when they get an alert. How do they identify what that alert is telling them? How do they identify whether that's a threat or not? How do they identify it's a false positive or not? So tailoring the intelligence is going to be very much a question of how mature the organization is, what they need to consume, and actually it's dependent upon how much you care about it is going to be dependent upon how you're regulated as well. So if you're a regulated organization, there's a lot more rules and other legal compliances that you have to deal with in order to make sure that you are answering what the regulator needs from you. And threat intelligence for DORA, NIS2, etc. is one of those requirements that's being levied for organizations to have. Different people in the organization want different things from threat intelligence. So you've got a range of people from the CISO all the way down to the business that want to know something about what is the threat to them and how it's going to affect them. So, for example, if you're merging with a new organization and you're buying a new organization, you kind of want to know what sort of state their cybersecurity is in before you buy them, before you hook your network up to theirs, because if they've got vulnerabilities, if they're already compromised by attackers and they're unsafe, you want to know that ahead of time so that you know what to do in order to be able to remediate, mitigate whatever problems they have before you start connecting the networks together and exchanging information. For example, you've got other things in there like the CISO is going to want to know who's going to attack me, what are they going to use, what do I need to defend myself, what sort of security appliances do I need to make sure that the attackers who really are a threat to me are kept out. So there's a whole range of different questions that are asked there. So different questions right across the organization, and the board's going to be asking things like, what is my risk from these attackers? How much do I need to invest in security? What is a proportionate investment in security against the potential risk of being attacked that I face and the potential damage to the crown jewels, our critical economic functions that I might face? So there's a whole range of different things there, all of which requires threat intelligence to answer it at the top level. What we do is we provide narrative threat intelligence reporting on all the threat actors out there that tell you everything about every threat actor you could possibly want to know about, how they do the hacking, what the technical indicators are to detect them on your network, and then be able to apply that in that space. At the top end, we also give a connection back into a Slack channel, which allows you to speak directly to our analysts, so that if you've got a question about the reporting, if you've got a question about something you've identified, which you've seen in our reporting, you can then go directly back to the analysts and say, what's this? I need help on this. I don't understand this. So that's another aspect of what we do. We also have tailored assessments where you can hire us to look at your organization, look at all the vulnerabilities, look at the exposure of your digital footprint on the internet, look at what an attacker looking at you could find, potentially discover, and then use to attack you. Look at your executives in the organization and work out how exposed their internet presence is. So there's a lot of things that we do in that space as well. And of course, we do provide a lot of things like malware reverse engineering, specialist sort of technical activities to help clients if they're in the middle of an incident response, understand what the incident is, understand what they're actually dealing with in terms of the actual attacker, and then we can provide that information back to them so that they can then take remediation action, mitigation action against that activity. For our signatures, for those of you who are running Microsoft appliances, for example, Office 365, we have taken our signatures, especially our Yara signatures, so our network signatures, and our detection signatures. We've adapted them to work with Microsoft Defender and Microsoft Sentinel, other things like Tanium signals. So we work with a number of different possible sort of detection options, and all our signatures are adapted to integrate with that, to augment what you get from those providers already in order to be able to detect the malicious activity on your systems. We have, this is the sort of threat intelligence reporting that we provide. It's probably a little bit small up there on the screen, but you sort of get an idea of what you're seeing. So you get a list of different sort of signatures or indicators of compromise. You get the actual narrative reports. You get the parts of the world that it's affecting, and you get particular profiles on the individual threat actors to understand more about them. The reports basically, what you get out of the reporting is dependent upon who you are and what you're interested in. We do a lot of global reporting, which focuses on what is the general threat out there, what is the strategic threat right across the landscape, what's the latest in the past month that you need to know about in terms of how the threat is progressing, what threat actors are doing out there, and then individual reports that are very specifically focused on individual threat actors. You can see some of the reports up there that are sort of relevant to what's been happening in Sweden in the past several months. So we have the Turkish attack team that went after various organizations in Sweden in response to the Quran burning. You see some stuff there on the NATO expansion. So there's a lot of hacking and DDoS that's going on out there by patriotic groups that are affiliated with Russia and other sort of countries that are desperately trying to sort of like make Sweden nervous about going in as a NATO member, and therefore attacking different Swedish organizations. And we hear, of course, ransomware, which is everywhere. We've got the sort of attack that happened against Coop, but there have been others recently. Most of them you won't hear about in the media, or you'll just hear that there's a cyber attack, but nobody will actually tell you what kind of cyber attack it was. So we have those kinds of reports as well. So lots of relevant reporting for the Swedish market, as well as the global market. And I've mentioned that analyst collaboration space where you can actually go directly to the analyst, and this is one of our real differentiators as a threat intelligence provider. You get direct access to the analyst to ask the questions that you're interested in, and you've got that 24/7 because we operate on a 24/7 basis, follow the sun. We've got people all over the world who can answer your questions any time of day or night. And here's an example of where that came in handy. We had a customer who had phishing emails coming in that looked like they were from a hacker. They asked us to have a look at this. We don't know what this is. We need a little help. We ran the technical indicators that we found in the phishing email across our databases and knowledge bases. We discovered that this was actually a business email compromise actor that was trying to send phishing emails to the finance department to get them to impersonating someone within the organization, someone senior. Usually it's the CEO or someone just below down who would be able to authorize a large transaction, getting them to authorize that transaction and pay it into a foreign bank account, usually somewhere where the attacker has access, in order to get money out of them. Once the actual client realized that, they were able to search their holdings, their emails, their systems for any emails from those attackers. They found all of them. They were able to stop the business email compromise before it started. So that's the sort of thing that we offer in terms of analyst collaboration, the ability to speak to us on that kind of basis. And of course, I've mentioned the behavioral content. So we have obviously the sorts of Yara signatures. We have Sigma signatures. We have all sorts of detection signatures to look for in logging. So we offer that, and that comes with our reporting as well. And we can offer that separately as a kind of a larger offering for people who are focused mainly on detection. And I mentioned the threat assessments that we do. They're usually done like on a very large basis where we look at your whole organization, provide you with a very significant report that covers both the threat actors who are likely to be targeting you, as well as all the types of vulnerabilities that you might have, exposed credentials on the internet, exposed credentials on the dark web, all the things that you would otherwise need to know about, and then fix and remediate in order to be in a better place from your cyber detection and mitigation posture. And we have tailored intelligence monitoring when it comes to deep dark web. So we have access to basically a number of third-party providers who give us access to what's happening on Russian criminal forums, on what's out there basically being sold in the cybercrime market that might pertain to your company. So you might have a domain for your business. We'll look up the domain, we'll look up your IP addresses, and then we'll see if anybody in the market is actually selling that stuff. If you've already been the victim of a ransomware attack, that's usually the first place that it will pop up as to like any credentials that are for sale. Anything that the hackers have found that they're able to use will come up in this space. We're able to do that too. And we are able, if you're like a less mature cybersecurity organization, you're looking to develop your threat intelligence holdings, you're looking to develop your capability to do threat intelligence, we do some advisory work to be able to help you to go from being a very small threat intelligence organization to being able to do threat hunting, have a SOC, all the other capabilities that you might be interested in. And we have obviously another option, which is you can hire us. If you've got a large amount of material that needs analyzing from a threat intelligence perspective, you can buy a certain number of analyst hours from us to come in, look at what you've got, and then help you try and make sense of us. That's what we call the dedicated research hours option. And it can be bought in, obviously, in addition to all the other offerings that we have. And then here's some examples of where we're actually used our threat intelligence to help clients. So in the first case, you've got a situation where a client has found something on the network that looks malicious, but it's just QBot. So QuackBot is more like a distribution mechanism for other malware that some criminal providers out there have. However, what we know is that it's usually the precursor for a ransomware attack. So we were able to identify that it was QuackBot, and then we were able to get back to the client immediately and say, whatever you're doing, you need to go looking for this ransomware immediately because that's the next thing that's going to happen to you. They were able to find it and stop it before it was distributed on the network. In the second case, we had a very, I would say, usually unusual case of a very powerful Russian threat actor who started a phishing campaign against a specific Swedish firm. We identified that this phishing was happening from our intelligence. We're able to tell the firm that they were being targeted so that they could start looking for those indicators. They could stop any kind of like follow-on activity from the actor before it even started. In the Ukraine, it came up to the anniversary of the war the other week. We found a huge phishing campaign that they were going to use. The attackers were going to use to attack Ukrainian government institutions. We identified the way of identifying that activity, sent it over to the Ukrainian CERT. They were able to start looking for that activity and stopping it before it hit Ukrainian government network. So we do try and help things for other cause, other defenders out there to defend themselves better. And we did discover a large number of stolen usernames and passwords for the cloud estate of a particularly large company that were being sold by a Russian cybercrime gang on the dark web. We were able to provide those credentials back to the company in Sweden, who were then able to do something about it and try and change all those passwords so they weren't being able to be accessed by any cyber criminals to do anything bad. Our major data sources, we've got lots of stuff that come from our own kind of estate in PwC. So a former boss of mine back in the UK once said, it's not any good unless you can eat your own dog food and prove to others that it's useful to you. Otherwise, how are they going to know it's useful to them? So in this case, we actually do deploy all our signatures and our detection, and our reporting is used by our own defense teams across the PwC network, so 165 organizations. And because we have those signatures, etc., deployed, we also get all that information back from all those countries around the world to be able to develop our own unique threat intelligence, and it's one of the unique aspects of our offering. Naturally, we have our incident response organizations in 42 different countries. That enables us to look into all sorts of different incidents that are happening around the world and then learn from that and then use that to produce more threat intelligence on the latest threats, and they cover just about every sector. So that's extremely useful. And then, of course, we do a lot of like infrastructure monitoring of what the actors are using out there ourselves, so we can pick up intelligence. We're involved in a lot of penetration testing for organizations, so we learn from that and we're able to develop attacker simulated sort of behavior. And we have trusted sharing communities out there that we're a part of. Some of them are in very large closed kind of sharing communities run by national cyber organizations that we learn from, and we contribute to those communities as well. We're spread out throughout the world, so I'm here in Sweden. Magnus, who's sitting to my right, is my boss and is kind of head of the whole sort of digital trust and cyber business here. And we have other people, again, in the Americas, Australia, the UK and Ireland, so we operate on a global basis. Okay, I might hand back to Hannah then for any questions. Yes, both of you.
Thank you so much. Like you said, every organization is different and the threat landscape is different. But in your experience, are there any common denominators that we see right now where organizations are or tend to be vulnerable for these types of threats?
Yes, I think the three things that I would nominate here are very poor speed in trying to patch networks. So when a vulnerability is released, attackers are usually making use of that vulnerability within less than 24 hours. Organizations are often too slow to actually patch the vulnerability before the attackers get to abuse it and attack others. Second thing I would say is often poor use of multi-factor authentication. So if someone's remotely attacking your network, usually like an SMS or some kind of Google Authenticator, whatever the organization uses, is a great way of making sure that they can't get into the network without having that second factor. But there are a lot of organizations out there that don't have it, so the attacker, all they need is a stolen username and password, they can get in and they take everything. And then the third thing I would say is poor access controls on networks. Years ago I wouldn't have nominated that, but once the attacker is in the network, they shouldn't be able to get access to all the crown jewels straight away. But a lot of people have, in their accounts, have access to everything, and their roles allow them access to everything. And so you get a person lower down the organization who has access to everything, and they're the ones whose account has been compromised. Suddenly, the attacker's got access to everything. So better role-based access control.
We have some questions coming in here through Slido. Thanks for your participation. Someone anonymous is writing, my experience is that we... No, but we have another from Oscar as well, but we're getting back to that. But my experience is that we in Sweden can be a little naive in this area. We adapt new technologies too fast sometimes without thinking about the risks. Agree? Question mark. Do you have any data that we're more... The cyber threats, crimes are more... what do you say, happy to succeed in Sweden compared to other countries?
Have a look at the DDoS attacks that happened recently in Sweden and the disruption it caused by comparison to how the DDoS attacks in other countries have played out and how much disruption they caused against government organizations and some private organizations that you might depend upon for public services or online services, etc. I'm not even going to say anything more than that. Just have a think about that. But I would say that that Sweden is a rapid adopter of a lot of good technologies out there, and obviously we're seeing cloud come in more, and that's something that's good. Once you actually do decide that you're going to adopt stuff, you do it very quickly and you do it well and integrate it well into your organizations. Your finance sector, for example, is as good as anywhere else that I've ever seen in terms of the protections that you put in place. So I think maybe there's a cautiousness about how you approach purchasing new products, adopting new technologies, but once you're in, you're in. And that's very, very heartening from my perspective.
Yeah, so we had another question here. If you see any key differences between the public sector and the private sector concerning the ability and or resources engaged in cyber threat response?
So government organizations vary wildly in my in my experience. So it depends how much budget they've got from the central authority that gives them a cyber budget. It often depends on whether they've got like a budget where they've got the one budget to spend on security and on ICT, like new digital technologies, etc., because often those organisations will want more new functional digital stuff to work with rather than spending too much on security. Whereas I think a lot of the private sector, again, will vary wildly depending upon whether it's finance sector, heavily regulated, needs to spend on cyber threat intelligence and other things like that, knows what the threat is and has the budget to spend on it, versus much smaller businesses out there that have to make hard decisions about how much they're going to spend on security and understand what's proportionate. And it's different between a central government organisation who are very well funded and centrally, generally speaking, and local authorities and municipalities who don't have huge budgets, again, who are being left to like the CEO to decide how much money they're going to get to spend on security. And it's more difficult for them, I would say, to develop an adequate security offering by comparison to some of their bigger brothers and sisters in central government.
A lot of questions coming in, but they have to find you during the lunch break.
Indeed.
But we have time for one more. Are there countries that protect or even promote hackers, and to what percentage of all threats?
Well, I think you all know that there are some nation states that don't tend to prosecute people who are hacking as long as they're not hacking that nation state. And therefore, in those nation states, I would say hacking is allowed to proliferate. There are also some nation states that have very large state hacking organisations and operations that can really scale the attacks they do on a global level that are problematic. So I would say that, yes, where there isn't rule-based law in place to actually prosecute hacking in terms of like compromise or computer misuse effectively, whether that's against people within the country or people outside the country, it makes it easy for criminals to operate and to do the things that they do in terms of attacking other nations. And if there's no sanctions or otherwise treaties in place to like, you know, extradite people committing those crimes, then they're pretty much invulnerable unless they travel. And then, you know, what's the Black Sea for a holiday versus Thailand? I don't know, but sometimes it could result in an arrest if you go to Thailand versus the Black Sea for some criminals.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Yeah, and thank you to you, Matt. We need to stop there.
Thank you.
So, yeah,
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. Thank you.